I figure since Clay is working on the skill trees at this moment, I should comment on one of them that really is close to home for me. You may not know it, but I am a Wendy main. And she is getting a skill tree soon, so I think it's important to get my thoughts on it. Frankly, I think most of the stuff on Wendy's tree is decent. I don't really need to go into most of them since a lot of it just makes it easier for Wendy to get more materials for Abigail, while also buffing Wendy in different ways, and also giving a new interesting way to use mobs that don't normally get any use. Though some of these do need some more tuning to make them more worthwhile versus just being an alternate form of an existing item. They are interesting and could really combo well with Wendy's potential. There are two things though that really irk me when the tree is discussed, and those two are the things I wanted to talk about. First, we need to see the evolution of Wendy, from single player to multiplayer. Originally, Wendy's power was based on waiting. You needed to wait a few days for Abigail to charge up in order to summon her. During that time, you were a weaker Wilson and couldn't do much against enemies. Once Abigail was charged, you can summon Abby and be compensated for that downtime. If she died, however, you would have to wait a few more days for her to charge back up again. This is the Wendy that exists in Solo Don't Starve, and slightly in Together before the refresh was implemented. Because of this, you were incentivized to try and keep Abigail from dying because then it would mean you would be weaker for the time she was gone. In DST with her refresh, Clay made Abigail more accessible where you no longer needed to wait to summon her. However, in doing so, she would be in a weaker state, having lower max HP and no free light. But if given enough time, she would go back to her max HP and brightness. The main part of this was that you could still use Abigail while she was in the process of leveling up, meaning Wendy no longer needed to wait for a full powered Abigail. She could risk using a weaker Abigail to obtain access to Abigail's utility right away, at the cost of potentially putting Abigail or Wendy in danger. They also added in the concept of Abigail's debuff, which incentivizes Wendy players to combat creatures with Abigail versus just letting Abigail do all the work. This is the new core concept of Wendy that was developed for Together in Wendy's refresh. You get more benefits for taking more risk, and you could mitigate this risk slightly by using Abigail's Sisturn to level her up faster, or with potions to heal Abigail up or give her unique powers to aid in her survival. You can take risks that jeopardize Abigail's survival for more power, and also measures to protect it. Thing is, these are measures Wendy chooses for Abigail, not something innately within Abigail to try and attempt. Because Abigail's an AI, her actions are not always going to be the best ones, so forcing her to try and be more focused on survival without the input of the player usually leads to problems. If she is going to have any form of survivability, it has to be simple, kind of like how her shield works currently. It's something that Wendy players can take into account and try to maximize as much as possible by adjusting their gameplay. Her new skill tree did provide new ways for Wendy to help Abigail's survival by boosting her health or making potions easier to mass produce, and just being able to command Abigail out of dangerous areas. Those are really great additions to Wendy's kit. However, they re-added back Wendy's waiting downside on one of them, and that's the Sisturn. The Sisturn can boost Abigail's HP temporarily, but in order to do that, you must dedicate time to have Abigail sit in one spot, being useless. That kind of goes against what is built already for Wendy and Together, which is being able to freely use Abby without needing to restrict her to one place. DST went with giving the player more freedom to roam around with their powers, and this skill causes you to have to wait 2.5 to 5 minutes to maximize the gain of this temporary health buff, when a lot of times it doesn't really feel useful because you don't get to interact with that health. It's just a buffer before you need to start applying potions. I honestly feel like the skill should be changed to act like the current Abigail leveling system that's in place, where each point would make it possible for Abigail to gain an extra level, increasing her HP by 150, boosting her light radius more, and heck, what if they even gave Abigail a slight speed boost too, so that way she is equal to the speed of the player, since she moves at 5 and the player moves at 6. This way Abigail can have a max of 900 HP that can be regened, and a slightly bigger light source just for basic utility. If Abigail dies, you lose all of this and need to wait a longer time for her to be back at full power, which still keeps up the risk-reward factor of trying to keep Abigail alive. I think it's best to make it so that you can only access these levels through the Sisturn though, so it incentivizes building one. And as for combat, I always thought it was better to give Abigail more controllability versus just straight tank ability, but having a slightly bigger max health would help with dealing with the power creep of damage that new mobs do. The other problem I have deals with the Gestalt Form of Abigail. Theoretically, this form is supposed to be a more survivable form of Abigail, one that gets out of range and swoops in to deal damage. However, that's only against single targets, and you have to give up Abigail's AoE and consistency of being near Wendy for this. I feel that the cost of Gestalt Abby is just too great, especially since you can only access her through the moon dial on a full moon, and if you don't like her that way, you have to wait 10 days for a new moon in order to change Abigail back to her regular self. Why is this even a thing? Imagine if Woody could only choose one transformation he could use every full moon, and that is the only transformation he can use for the next 10 days. You should not limit a character's toolset in this manner, and that's just another problem with Gestalt Abby. It's a trade-off skill versus being additive to the playstyle of Wendy. You trade off the AoE utility of Abigail for this single target one. It's supposed to be more survivable with slightly more single target DPS, but it kinda just loses its purpose when the other side is just better at doing that job. Gestalt Abby doesn't serve the purpose of being a survivable form of Abby because she still goes in and gets hit. This form only serves one purpose, which is to make single target DPS and Abigail's survivability better. However, I just don't think there's a good way to make this idea work. It's either overpowered where Wendy doesn't need to intervene, or underpowered, meaning you're just better off having regular Abigail. And the fact that Abigail runs away from the fight to try and stay alive causes her to lose synergy with Wendy instead of helping Wendy out. This is why in order to make a summon better for a character, you need to give the summon master more control over that summon instead of giving the summon a mind of its own, because then the summon will do things the player doesn't want. This is why Wirt's Merm survival skill is the worst skill of her tree. It follows the same process of summons doing something the summon master doesn't want them to do. I've always seen Abigail and Wendy as a beacon of light in the darkness where everything comes and tries to take you out, while you hold your ground with your sister, moving around, ensuring that you're in the right spots to take advantage of Abigail and your positioning. This is why I suggest removing the single target aspect of Gestalt Abigail, where she moves around the battlefield and swoops in, and keep her as a normal ghost with her normal AoE attack. I feel that instead of transforming Abigail, this interaction gives Wendy a new ability to make Abigail become a beacon, and using this ability makes Abigail hard to push and stay in one area, giving her a defensive buff to reduce damage she takes, while releasing a cloud like the Grazers that buffs players that are within Abigail's range. This buff gives players bonus planar protection, planar damage, as well as a small lifesteal of 0.2 HP a hit. This would be a much more defensive orientated Abigail, while also making it so that players have access to her standard powers without needing to wait multiple days if they regret transforming Abigail in the first place. This would be a simple on and off command for Wendy, just like how Rile Up works. If you want Abby to sit still and buff/attack, you can do it with the push of a button. You can also synergize this with her attack command, which would be the only way to move Abigail when she is in this position. This version of Abigail is to contrast the shadow side's focus on doing damage. You cast a murder spell to do more DPS on the shadow side, but you and Abigail are less safe from other creatures. This allows choices between the two sides that players can choose and what suits their playstyle more. Each would have their own benefits and play their own unique role as how to Wendy may approach a situation. That is why I'm suggesting this change for Gestalt Abby. Currently right now, Lunar and Shadow do basically the same things and don't provide anything different from each other, while one is just clearly more superior than the other. Having Lunar Abigail be defensive while Shadow be offensive can let players choose to be more risky to do more damage, potentially having Abigail die, or more safety in Lunar, keeping yourself and Abigail safer with less overall DPS, really tying into the risk-reward factor of Wendy's playstyle. And that's the big problem in a few of Wendy's skill tree perks. Some of them revert back to the old Wendy status where you feel like you can't do anything without waiting, and that affinities don't really push for a different playstyle. And that's really just it. Clay usually tries to make something unique with the few things that they have, but unfortunately I think we just gotta wait until everything goes live to see how well Clay's vision gets taken by the public. Maybe we have another refresh situation where Clay completely dumps their idea and makes something new from scratch. Who knows at this point? That's just the power of the most popular character in the game. I, for one, probably won't be using the Gestalt Form. It's just not worth it for the commitment you have to make for it. I would rather just stick to the easier to access Shadow Form and default AoE Abby. Even though I would love a defensive-minded Abigail, I've always enjoyed being surrounded by enemies and kiting around Abigail as they try to overwhelm me, and I feel that the Lunar form of Abigail should go that way. These are just my thoughts. Ultimately, what Clay does is their decision, and I have to deal with it. Let me know your thoughts down below. If you like my ideas, go ahead and share them. I stole the Lunar idea from a guy on the forums, and I wanted to showcase it a bit more, so go check that thread out. The link for it will be in the description. Until next time, this has been Tara, and take care.